Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Star Trek Revisited with me, your host, Peter. In this episode, we are, as ever, going to be reviewing an original series episode of Star Trek. In this case, Shore Leave. This one is one that I very much enjoyed growing up, and I've not watched it for a very long time, so it'll be interesting to see how it sits now when I'm more seasoned, shall we say. Well, without any further ado, shall we just get into the episode? We get started with a typical opening shot of the Enterprise orbiting a very Earth-like looking planet. We get a captain's log stating that the crew is in need of rest and shore leave after several months of very, very trying and exhausting missions. I think the previous episodes that we've been through already can certainly attest to that they certainly deserve this downtime, shall we say. On the bridge, we see Spock first. He's over at the environmental controls near the view screen at the left-hand side, or the port side of the bridge, I should say. And he walks back over towards his station, passing the command area, helm and navigation. And we get a wonderful treat of Clifford Brent, as I'm now going to call him, and Frank Leslie sat at navigation and helm. In the background at engineering, where Leslie quite often would sit, I'm pretty sure that is Lieutenant Hadley. So all we're missing here really is David L. Ross to get that quartet of those Star Trek background regulars. We have a new yeoman in this episode as well. Yeoman Barrows is standing with Kirk at the command chair as Spock circles round and stands with them. Now, as Kirk leans back from viewing the report that the yeoman is showing him, he winces in pain, and Barrows and Spock ask him, what's wrong, Captain? He says, a knot in my back. And what happens next is quite amusing in that Yeoman Barrows circles around behind him and starts massaging his back. And Kirk thinks that it's Spock doing this, which is highly amusing. And he says, oh yeah, that's it. A bit higher. Dig it in there, Mr. Spock. And Spock wanders round in front of the captain, and Kirk realizes it's not his trusty first officer who is carefully caressing his back. It's his young female yeoman, to which he says, thank you, yeoman, that's sufficient. And we then get into a conversation between Kirk and Spock, where Spock says the crew needs rest. There's not a crewman aboard who does not need rest, excepting myself, of course. And this all comes from the fact that Yeoman Barrows is mentioned to Kirk that you need rest, Captain, and Spock is actually agreeing with that. So we do learn in this opening scene also that whilst this is all going on the bridge, they already have scouting parties down on this planet, which appears to be tranquil, beautiful, peaceful, idyllic. And the landing parties consist of Dr. McCoy and Mr. Sulu and others who will come to see shortly. And Kirk decides that as he rubs his eyes, he's clearly looking very, very tired and on the verge of being a bit irritated. He gets up and he says to Uhura, have Dr. McCoy's scouting report, routed to my quarters, Miss Uhura. And then we cut down to this planet. And this is a real first in Star Trek, the original series, if you're going in production order, which I always do, as you know. And it's a real first in the sense that we're outdoors. Now, Miri doesn't count, because Miri, yes, it was outdoors. They weren't on a plastic rock set. They were actually in the outdoors, but they were on the Paramount back lot. Here, they're actually outdoors. They're in a lovely, greeny, woody, foresty environment, and it looks so beautiful and peaceful and tranquil. And we cut to McCoy and Sulu walking through this beautiful, beautiful scene, which looks very peaceful and restful. And they're looking very, very happy and relaxed. And McCoy acknowledges the fact that the crew needs this, and hoping that the captain will recommend a shore leave on this planet. Now, why they're here, they're basically an advanced scouting party to ensure that this is suitable for shore leave for the members of the Enterprise crew, that there are no hidden dangers or concerns that would prevent that from happening. Sulu wanders off and he goes to get some cell samples for the planet for his studies, blade of grass, and so on and so forth. And this is where the comedy of this episode begins. This is an episode which has a strong element of fun in it. Don't get me wrong, there is a an element of danger and intrigue and mysteriousness about it too, but it's definitely got its fun elements. And it's probably the first one, actually, that I can think of. You could argue that Mudd's Women had elements of that in it, with Harry Mudd being that lovable sort of character. I don't like that episode anymore, as I've already mentioned when we reviewed it. But anyway, I'm getting off track. But this scene is set up very, very nicely a few moments before what ultimately happens here by the fact that McCoy says to Sulu, "This is really something just like Alice in Wonderland, isn't it?" And as we've said, Sulu goes off to get that blade of grass. McCoy turns around and he's confronted by the sight of this obvious human in a white rabbit costume who says, "Oh, my bells and whistles, I'll be late." And the look on McCoy, so DeForest Kelly acts the flip out of this. He's just absolutely amazing. The look on his face is priceless as the rabbit turns and runs into a hole in the hedge. And McCoy, still looking a little bit flummoxed by all this, what he's just seen, then sees an adorable young-looking Alice in Wonderland in the traditional sort of blue dress run up and said, "Excuse me, sir, have you seen a rather large white rabbit?" And McCoy doesn't say a word, and he's acting without words here, and he just points, and it's absolutely wonderful. And the little girl does a little curtsy, which is adorable, and she says, "Thank you very much," and runs off into the hedge herself, following the direction of the big white rabbit. McCoy just, again, he closes his eyes, like shaking his head as if to, "Am I dreaming? Am I hallucinating?" And then he shouts, "Sulu!" And Sulu glances over from collecting his samples, goes to the doctor, who just looks, as you would imagine, super confused. And we end the teaser and we go into the opening titles. After the titles, we get the name of the episode, Shore Leave, as the Enterprise continues to orbit. And a nice little touch about this is, as Kirk is reading out his captain's log, he's audibly telling us, the audience, that he's tired and he's not quite himself. He needs this rest because he can't even remember the star date, 3056 or whatever it was, point 7, and he goes, trying to recall it. And nice little detail like that. And Kirk's now in his quarters, and Yeoman Barrows is there with him, and Spock enters the room as Barrows leaves. They then get a call from the planet where McCoy, who's now sitting on a bit of tree bark that's by beautiful water, lovely scene again, and he's making his report to the captain, and he says, "Well, I may have to report myself unfit for duty because on this so-called uninhabited planet," that's an important point that I haven't mentioned yet in all this, the planet is supposed to be uninhabited according to all their readings. He just saw a rather large white rabbit pull out his pocket watch and say that he was late. Kirk reacts with humor to this and he says, "That's very good, Bones. I got one for you. The rabbit was followed by a little blonde girl." And McCoy confirms this as Spock does a classic Spock eyebrow as if to say, "What the heck are these humans on about now?" Kirk dismisses McCoy's report, thinking it's a joke, thinking it's a McCoy pill, as he describes it to Spock. He says, he's trying to get me down there, he's not going to succeed. Kirk is being ever the stubborn captain here. He's trying to be the hero. He's trying to demonstrate the fact that he can continue. His crew needs rest, but he does not. And what Spock does here is absolutely fantastic. He has his clipboard in hand and he says that, "Captain, I have a matter of importance to talk to you about. We have a crewman aboard who is down in terms of performance and reaction time, and this individual is being rather stubborn, has been told they need rest, and refuses any offer of help or rest or relaxation." And Kirk says that that's much too low a rating. This is not good. Who is this individual? That man will go ashore on my orders. What's his name? To which Spock casually reads out, "James Kirk." And Kirk's look on his face is just priceless. And then we cut back to Spock and his look when he says, "Enjoy yourself, Captain." Because Kirk can't get out of this now. He says, "This man will go ashore on my orders," but the man is him. So he's done for now. He has to go ashore. And we get a little voiceover. Spock continues talking as we cut back down to the planet, and we see this rock on the ground start to slowly move, while Spock is saying, "You'll have no problems, Captain. You'll enjoy it. It's tranquil. It's peaceful." But this rock moves to reveal an old style revolver underneath it with dramatic drum type music, which is setting the scene for what's to come very, very nicely. As we cut to two more members of our scouting party. Now, these are Lieutenant Angela Teller, as she is called here. Now, this, for the eagle-eyed of you, will notice that this is actually Angela Martine, who was in the episode Balance of Terror. She's still called Angela here, but she's addressed as Teller. It's arguable, it's debatable whether she's meant to be the same character or not, but with her is Esteban Rodriguez, and they're sampling the plants and the trees. They've got their tricorders and their little handheld tricorder scanning devices there, and I don't know if we're meant to interpret that there is a romantic connection between these two, because Angela comes up to him and says, "Does it always have to be work with you when there's so much loveliness around us?" And Rodriguez says, "There'll be no time to appreciate any loveliness if this report is not ready when the captain wants it." And as if on cue, we see two figures beaming down, and it's Kirk and Yeoman Barrows, who are arriving on the planet. Kirk is armed with a Type 2 phaser. Yeoman Barrows does not have a sidearm, which is interesting. It's probably because it was the 60s and that she is a girl. So, go figure. An interesting thing to note about the phasers, actually, is that at this point in time, after the early episodes, the Type 2 phasers are becoming more prevalent than was the case earlier on in Season 1, where the more senior officers were using the Type 1 phasers. It should also be noted that at this point, the sort of orange sashes or belts that they wore to grip their phasers onto have now been replaced with a black one that sort of blends in with the colour of the trousers more accurately, and it does look better, actually. It just looks a whole lot better. Kirk, Barrows, and Angela and Esteban greet each other warmly. Yeoman Barrows especially has a massive smile on her face. Kirk thanks them for their efforts, takes the report and says, "Now go off and enjoy yourselves. Enjoy the loveliness of this planet," as Kirk begins strolling towards Dr. McCoy, who Esteban says you'll find him that way. And he says, "Wow, there's so much beauty here." And an odd reply from Yeoman Barrows, who, well, seems to forget herself and just has a normal, everyday conversational reply, and that it is beautiful and lovely. And then she says, "Oh, I mean, affirmative, Captain." And I don't know why she felt the need to say that and go into a more militaristic hierarchy protocol response. I don't see anything wrong with the way she initially replied, and knowing Kirk, I don't think he would have objected to that, but it just caught me off guard a little bit. But they approach Dr. McCoy, who's standing there still looking very, very perplexed, and Barrows and Kirk find him, and McCoy points out to them that there are tracks on the ground. They look like giant rabbit footprints, and Kirk all of a sudden starts to take this quite seriously, and he calls the ship and says to Uhura, "Have any shore leave parties started beaming down yet?" And she says no, and Kirk says, "Well, hold off, don't beam them down." And McCoy actually says, despite the fact that he is in a real confusion and sense of panic and anxiety about this, says that, "Well, you're cancelling the shore leave on account of this?" He says, "Well, can you explain this, Doctor? You're the doctor, can you explain this?" And the conversation is interrupted by the sound of a loud bang from off in the distance, and Kirk reacts very, very swiftly, draws his phaser, and they run through the grass and the trees to the source of the sound. And it turns out that this is Sulu, who has found that revolver that was underneath the rock, and he's just casually firing it off into the distance, looking very pleased with himself. Kirk and the rest of them arrive, and Kirk demands an explanation, to which Sulu says, "Well, I found it." And he says, "Oh, I've always wanted one like this. I don't have a revolver like this in my collection. And he's not thought to question why it's there. He's just simply picked it up and started firing it without question. Kirk is not too thrilled with his officer's lack of diligence and curiosity here, and he puts his hand out and gestures for Sulu to give him the revolver, which he promptly stuffs into his own pants, which is a questionable decision, to be honest. I'm not too familiar with weapons, I must admit. Being a Brit, we're not as fond of our firearms as our American across the Atlantic counterparts, but I do know there's something called a safety catch on a gun. Is that something you have on revolvers, or I know you have them on pistols, but I don't know. Maybe some of you US folks can tell me that. And they spot some more tracks of this big white rabbit, and McCoy also spots some footprints of the little girl, the blonde girl who was following. So Kirk instructs Sulu and Yeoman Barrows to go back to the glade where they first met, and he and McCoy agree to follow the rabbit and backtrack the girl and try and find the source of this ever-developing mystery. Now, as Kirk and McCoy walk off, from behind them, what I can only describe as an old-style television aerial appears behind them, and clearly this is the first indication that something is monitoring them. And as McCoy and Kirk continue to walk, they get into a conversation about Kirk's academy days and how he was very, very grim and serious and not very open to jokes or joviality. And he relays a story of another classman there at the academy called Finnegan, a guy by the name of Finnegan, the practical joker, the type who would put a bucket of cold water over a half-open door, that sort of thing. My own personal devil, a guy by the name of Finnegan, practical jokes galore, and all on me. And as they separate to track their respective sets of footprints, wouldn't you know it, but Finnegan, as if by magic, appears leaning on a tree. And this guy is a colourful character, to say the least. He's played by a guy called, I believe he's called Bruce Mars, and this would be the first of two appearances that this particular actor had in the original Star Trek. The other one, he would play a smaller role in the final episode of season 2 called Assignment Earth, where he plays an old Earth police officer. This time he has a lot more to do, and Kirk looks astonished and he's like, Finnegan? And Finnegan says, in the flesh, Jimmy boy, or words to that effect. It says, you never know where I'm going to strike. And he literally does that. He comes up to Kirk, who's caught off guard, and Finnegan belts him one, and Kirk lands on the floor and does a classic Kirk rollover and on his knees. Finnegan's baiting him, and Kirk gets this look of glee on his face as if to say, all right, I'm going to get you for that, and let's try that one again. And Kirk indeed launches into Finnegan, and they wrestle a bit, and the scuffle is promptly interrupted by the sounds of screaming in the distance, and Kirk, ever alert, looks around and chases off to find the source of the screams as Finnegan taunts him in the background, saying, that's right, run away, you coward. And McCoy joins Kirk as they run towards the source of the screaming, and they find that it is Yeoman Barrows, who is leaning against a tree, which is covered in this sort of red paint, perhaps. I don't know what that's meant to be, but it's clearly not a natural phenomenon. I don't know what stylistic choices were made here, or whether that's just the way the outdoors unit found the tree, but it all strikes me as a bit weird that this tree has these red blotches on it. But Yeoman Barrows' dress is torn, and she gives her report to Kirk of an individual who had come and assaulted her, and the way she describes it, McCoy comments that sounds like Don Juan, and she says, yes, I was just thinking, in a place like this, all a girl needs is Don Juan, just daydreaming, like about a person that you might like to meet. Kirk then inquires as to, well, where is Mr. Sulu? And Barrows relays to him that, he ran off after Don Juan. So Kirk instructs McCoy and her to go back to the glade, rendezvous with everyone. Kirk says he'll go off and find Mr. Sulu, and off he goes. As he does so, one of these television aerials pops up again, and he moves into a different scene here, and this is clearly a different location altogether than the sort of wooded glade sort of area that we had to the start of this episode. We're clearly in Vasquez Rocks, and Vasquez Rocks would become very, very, very famous as an outdoor location for Star Trek, and I'm pretty certain that what we're seeing here in terms of the location we are here, Vasquez Rocks being a very deserty, sandy place, that these plants and flowers that Kirk stops to admire and pluck one are not native to this environment. Now, what we get here is one of my all-time favorite pieces of Star Trek in the original series music, a lovely soft romantic theme, which I think only appears in 3 episodes in total. This one is where it's introduced. We also hear it again in the episode This Side of Paradise, and I believe we hear it one more time in the season 2 episode The Apple, very, very briefly. But it's a beautiful piece of music, which I love very, very much. It kind of goes do, 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 and it's a lovely, lovely piece of music. And this flower is something that obviously reminds Kirk of an old love and an old memory, because he gets this nostalgic, romantic, happy memory displaying on his face. And then he looks across, and the young lady that he's clearly been recalling and thinking of magically appears in front of him, and she's called Ruth. And Kirk looks at her in astonishment. It's like, Ruth, how can you be here? This is impossible. As Kirk is trying to take this all in, he gets a call from the ship from Spock to say that they're having some power troubles. And Kirk manages to steady himself and leave this situation, leave this lost love of his behind, and focus. He manages to detach himself from the distraction. As we cut to McCoy and Yeoman Barrows, who is in a very disheveled state now with a torn tunic. She's having the Kirk experience. It's not often that it's not William Shatner who's having this particular issue, but stand by for that. And as they walk through this lovely environment, I really like this sort of hint of romance that we get here between Yeoman Barrows and Dr. McCoy, when she relays to Bones that in an environment like this, a girl should be dressed in lots of flowing tall hats and veils and a fancy gown and whatnot. And McCoy says, well, you'd have armies of done ones to fight off in that event, and me too. And she says rather teasingly and flirtingly, is that a promise, Doctor? And I like this. I like it when Bones gets a little bit of hint of flirtation and romance. It happens very, very rarely for him. It's normally Kirk who gets all that sort of action. And once again, we can see a theme developing here, because seconds after Yeoman Barrows has imagined this costume that she would like to wear, wouldn't you know it, what she had in mind magically appears hanging from a tree. There's the tall hat with a veil and a green dress waiting for her, and she rushes over to it excitedly and exclaims to the Doctor, oh, they're lovely. And McCoy here, rather naughtily in my opinion, he should know better as a lieutenant commander and a seasoned Starfleet officer with morals and that sort of thing. He just randomly says, well, why don't you put it on? I'd like to see you in it. And neither of them seem to, although to be fair, Yeoman Barrows does briefly say something along the lines of, oh, I'm scared. Why, how can this magically be here? This doesn't make sense. And McCoy sort of dismisses it, and he says, oh, I don't know how or why it's here, but why don't you go put it on? And yeah, questionable. But off she goes, and she says, all right, but no peeking. And McCoy says, my dear, I'm a doctor. When I peek, it's in the line of duty. He gets a call in on his communicator from Rodriguez, who relays that the captain wants to meet them back at the glade or the glen. I can't remember if it's a glade or a glen, but I digress. But McCoy barely gets the message as the communications are breaking up, and we cut to some very obvious stock footage here of a tiger and of Angela and Esteban hiding from said tiger. So things are going very, very strangely on this planet. And if you've not noticed the pattern that is emerging here, it's clearly that whatever these people are thinking suddenly and magically appears. As we cut back to McCoy and Barrows, and Yeoman Barrows has put on the dress and the hat, and she does look very, very lovely in it. And McCoy gives her a smile of appreciation. As we cut to Kirk and Spock having a conversation between the Enterprise and the planet again, and Kirk is pacing through Vasquez rocks again, and they're trying to make sense of the situation. Kirk is also having problems with communication. Spock asks Kirk if he can boost his signal because he can barely hear him. Kirk says he's already on maximum. And Kirk sees a flock of birds in the sky, and again on this uninhabited planet. And when Kirk had spoken with Rodriguez just earlier, Rodriguez had said that I saw birds. And this is when Kirk was distracted by Ruth and said, "Don't you like birds, Mr. Rodriguez?" But so lots of very interesting things happening. Now we cut to Sulu, who just seems to since he went off to chase Don Juan, he seems to be just randomly strolling around now. He's walking through a very rocky environment, and suddenly out of this hatch in the ground appears a samurai, and Sulu tries to fire his phaser at said samurai, and nothing happens. The phasers are not working, and Kirk is still trying to communicate with Spock, and the communications not going well. Sulu appears from behind him and says, Captain, take cover, there's a samurai after me." And Sulu says to the captain, "I'm not going mad, Captain. He was there, I swear he was there." And Kirk says, "Don't worry, I believe you. I've seen some interesting characters myself." And he also says that communication seems to be out, having trouble. And Sulu says, "That's not all, so's my phaser." And Kirk tries his, and lo and behold, his phaser also will not work. At that moment, Spock beams down from the Enterprise, and he relays to Kirk that due to the problems that the Enterprise is now facing, they're having system failures, and the transporter is now useless. In his own words, he theorized that they could transport one more person, and Kirk is grateful for that because they can certainly use Spock's help in this situation. They start making their way back to the Glade, Glen, whatever it is, and back there, we can see Barrows and McCoy are encountering a knight on horseback, charging towards them. And it's at this point that McCoy has a bit of an epiphany. You can see his mood change. He's kind of losing patience with this, but also in his own head, rationalizing this as not being able to be real. These things cannot be real. Illusions cannot hurt us. So he stands his ground as this knight charges towards him with this lance on horseback as Kirk and Spock enter the scene. And McCoy doesn't move, but this does not go well for him because the knight strikes McCoy with the lance, and McCoy screams in pain, collapses to the ground. Spock tries to fire his phaser, but can't. Kirk shoots the Black Knight with the revolver, which has been stuffed in his pants all this time, with all that Kirk's been up to in this time of fighting with Finnegan and rolling around and all that. I hope it does have a safety catch. It's a miracle he's not shot off his own extremities with that thing. But he shoots, the knight falls, and they run over, and it's revealed that McCoy is dead. If McCoy had been there to pronounce his own death, he would have said, "I'm dead, Jim." Everyone reacts to this, and dramatic music plays, and the scene ends, and we get a captain's log as we see Kirk, Spock, Barrows dressed as this fairy tale princess, all crouched over McCoy's dead body, and Barrows becomes hysterical. Kirk sort of shakes her back into sense and says he needs everybody alert and on duty and focused. Sulu, meanwhile, has been examining the Black Knight, and we can see that it looks very, very much like a dummy, like something that has been manufactured. And Kirk and Spock come over to examine it, and Spock says, "Well, this is not human tissue, this is not real." And the mystery deepens more and more. Meanwhile, we get some more stock footage. We see an old World War II style plane overhead in the sky, which Rodriguez is obviously imagined because it's clear that he's been telling Angela about this as they've been strolling around, and he's clearly not got the hang of the fact that whatever he imagines will magically happen, because Angela says, well, can it hurt us? And he says, well, not unless it makes a strafing run, which is when they attack people on the ground. And wouldn't you know it, that's exactly what the plane starts to do. And they run. We get another stock footage shot of a pilot in within the plane, and they run, but Angela collapses to the ground, and she too seemingly is dead as Esteban crouches over her body. Meanwhile, Kirk and Spock can still see the plane overhead, and Sulu and Barrows too. They're looking up at it while they are distracted. It's noticed that Dr. McCoy's body has mysteriously disappeared, and the Black Knight too. And this mystery is getting to such a level that Kirk wants to take a step back, and he says to Spock, what could this all be about? And Spock says, well, let's try and examine things. Let's try and go back to what you were thinking when you encountered all of these individuals and these occurrences. And Kirk says, oh, well, I was thinking about the Academy, my days. And wouldn't you know it, as he thinks this thought again, here comes Finnegan once again. And Kirk shouts at Finnegan, Finnegan, what's been happening to my men? And I think Finnegan says words to the effect of, that's for me to know and you to find out, Jimmy boy. And off he runs, and Kirk gives chase despite Spock's protestations. And what follows to me is a massive thumbs down, in the sense that this chase and the coming fight scene just last way too long. So they chase, they fight, Kirk gets his shirt torn again. 1 minute Finnegan gets the upper hand, then Kirk gets the upper hand, and I'm going to skip over much of this, and eventually Kirk gets the upper hand and he wins, and he looks delighted. He's stumbling around with a big smile on his face, covered in mud and grit and grime, and his shirt is torn. And Spock appears and says, did you enjoy it, Captain? And Kirk acknowledges, yes, I did enjoy it. And Spock relays the fact that from his tricorder readings and his assessment and what's been going on, it's clear that whatever they wish for or imagine on this planet is instantly realized and brought to life, clearly from some sort of underground complex. And they say, well, this is obviously very, very dangerous now that we've realized this, and it's taken them long enough. They better get back and warn the others. And as they do so, they run along and they encounter things. Spock foolishly says, for example, when Rodriguez imagined the tiger, and then the tiger appears, and off they go. They encounter the samurai along the way. Meanwhile, Yeoman Barrows has decided to change out of the fancy dress and hat, and she's hanging it back on the tree. She's got her own uniform back on, which, unless I'm mistaken, is now torn on the other shoulder than it was previously. I'm sure it was on the right shoulder it was torn, unless she's put it on in a different way. I don't know. And she foolishly thinks of Don Juan again, because he appears and starts to drag her off, and Rodriguez and Sulu appear, and Sulu's getting ready to fight with his fancy skills there, and Kirk and Spock arrive, and Don Juan, realizing he's outnumbered, runs off. And Kirk's had enough at this point. He says, right, front and center, everyone stand to attention. Concentrate on that and only that. Don't think, don't breathe, just concentrate on being on attention. And then, from round the corner, a man appears wearing robes, and Kirk looks confused, and he says, well, who are you? And he responds, well, I'm the caretaker of this place, Captain Kirk. And he says, it's only now becoming clear to us that you don't realize the nature of our little planet here. This experiences that you've been having are designed to amuse you only. And Kirk's response to this is, well, that's all well and good if it hadn't cost the lives of a member of my crew. And then a voice of McCoy appears, and then we see McCoy looking very, very jolly, and says, possibly because no one has died, Jim. And he hears McCoy with these two cabaret girls from a chorus line that he once saw on Rigel 2, I think it was, that he's happily imagined. And I love the fact that when Yeoman Barrows hears his voice here, and she turns around with glee, but then immediately is not happy that McCoy has these two girls. There's a little bit of jealousy comes into play here. And Yeoman Barrows quickly inserts herself into McCoy's arms, and the girls are shooed away. One of whom goes to Sulu, who has an absolutely delighted look on his face, and one of which goes to Spock, who has a less than delighted look on his face. Although, if you are to believe the Spock that we're getting to know in Strange New Worlds is actually in there, then inside Spock's probably enjoying this more than he wants to let on. So it's now revealed that with some guidelines in place, with some care and attention to what they imagine, that they can have fun on this planet. And the caretaker reveals, come and play, come and enjoy our hospitality, and your wildest dreams and fantasies and experiences will be realized. So Kirk calls up to the ship, and communication is now restored, and he instructs Uhura to commence transporting shore leave parties to surface, tell them to expect the best shore leave that they've ever had. Spock detaches himself from the young lady and tries to excuse himself from this. Earlier in the episode, before the beam down, he had expressed reservations on how humans like to rest. To me, to rest is to rest rather than to expend energy running around on green grass. And he says, I'll go back to the ship. And Kirk's about to say, no, Spock, you stay, I'll go. But then Ruth appears again, and he quickly changes his mind and says, on the other hand, I'll stay for a day or two. And off he goes in the disheveled state that he's in, and to presumably get up to all sorts of fun with this imagining of Ruth, which brings me to a moral perspective here, in that it's rather an uncomfortable thing. If you remember an episode of Deep Space Nine, for example, if you are a fan of that particular show, there's an episode where a customer of Quark's Bar asks for a holosuite program in the guise of Major Kira, who he has a bit of a thing about, and this is a violation of that person's likeness. So is this not kind of the same thing? This isn't harmless, is it? I don't know. It's a moral quandary, I must admit. It doesn't feel right, I must admit. And surely somebody like Kirk, who was grounded in reality, this is unlike him for me. That he would accept this and he would go and have pleasure with a woman who is actually not the real woman, is a copy of somebody he knew and cared about. So it doesn't sit well for me that he does this, and that this is seemingly okay with everyone. But I'd be interested to hear your views on that in the comments of what you feel about it. And we cut to the Enterprise in orbit, and the shore leave is complete. Our party returns. Kirk and Barrows are all in clean uniforms again, and presumably they beamed up and got washed and fresh clothes and beamed down again and had their shore leave. But everybody looks happy. Poor Uhura looks like she's been on duty this whole time. I hope that she got a chance to go on shore leave as well, and she wasn't just stuck on duty the whole time. And Spock asks everyone if they've had a good time, and everyone agrees that, yes, we did. Yes, I think we did. And Spock sort of rolls his eyes, or well, he doesn't roll his eyes. He raises his eyebrows and says, most illogical. To which everybody laughs, and Kirk continues to laugh as he instructs Mr. Sulu to take us out of orbit, and the episode ends. And we can see that this episode, as the conclusion of the episode comes, that it's directed by Robert Spar. Now, let's take a look at Robert Spar. He only directed this one episode of Star Trek, so we can't compare him to anybody else there, so that's the only one. Who did we have as co-stars? We had Emily Banks as Tonya Barrows, Oliver McGowan as the caretaker, Perry Lopez as Rodriguez. More cast members here. We've got Bruce Mars, I was right with his name, as Finnegan, Barbara Baldavin as Angela, Nichelle Nichols as Uhura, Marsha Brown as Alice, Sebastian Tom as the Warrior, and Shirley Bonn as Ruth. The theme music for this the original theme was by Alexander Courage. This particular episode was composed and conducted by Gerald Fried. And we have to give him credit for that wonderful romantic theme that I really, really like. Really, really beautiful. So here we can see the whole cast as shown on IMDb. We can see, have we missed anyone? The Warrior, Ruth, the Black Knight there. Paul Baxley was uncredited, but he played the Black Knight. John Carr as Guard. Bill Blackburn as the Billy Blackburn played the White Rabbit. Well, there you go. Billy Blackburn, who is our Mr. Hadley, was apparently under that White Rabbit costume. And Frank Da Vinci there as Lieutenant Brent. Don Juan was played by Jim Gruzlazgi. Now, I wanted to take a look at some of the details of this episode on IMDb from the point of view of filming locations, with, as I said, this being the first one that they actually filmed on location. And we can see this here, Vasquez Rocks Natural Area Park, and it gives you presumably is that the zip code? And there we go. Production companies, Desilu Productions, Norway Corporation. And back to our composer, actually, Gerald Fry, just for a moment, who we can see here is his IMDb profile. We can see that he did this episode, Shore Leave, in season 1, and he did some in season 2 as well. And interestingly, though, although he obviously composed this theme, he was not credited with the other 2 episodes in which it appeared, This Side of Paradise and The Apple. So both of which I looked ahead, and both of which were composed by Alexander Courage. So maybe Alexander Courage just reprised that theme, or that suite, whatever you want to call it, for those particular episodes. The way the music works in this series is quite interesting, because there's a lot of repetition, more so than any other Star Trek series. In things like The Next Generation and onwards, each show had its own composer who did the original theme, but each episode had its unique score from start to finish, and we get a lot of repeated themes in the original series. Finally, let's give this episode a score out of 10. IMDb gives this a 7.3. I think that's there or thereabouts. I'm going to give this one a 7. I liked this episode. I enjoyed it just as much as I ever did. I can see some things in it that I hadn't noticed before. I'd never particularly noticed the moral implications of imagining whatever and whomever you want, and then being able to do whatever you want with them. But other than that, I think it's a harmless, fun episode. It's enjoyable. It's a lighter pace, especially after we've had so much battles in Balance of Terror and life or death situations in What Are Little Girls Made Of, and Dagger of the Mind, and the Galileo 7, and Miri, and 2 court-martials in a row in Court Martial and the Menagerie. So a lighter tone is most welcome at this time. So a 7 is what I'm going to give this episode. So there you go, folks. Another one in the bag. An easy watching episode. I think Shore Leave is very enjoyable, bit of harmless fun with a few just realized implications that I shared with you, but overall I really do still enjoy this episode, and I wouldn't go as far as saying that it's a massive favorite, but I always enjoy watching it, and I think the performances of those involved were very, very good. It's nice to see our cast members really outdoors in the wild, and we do see that a few other times in season 1 actually, and throughout some of the other episodes of seasons 2 and 3 as well. But it's all too rare. We get more often than not, we get the old plastic rock situation where we're in studios disguised as alien planets. But let me know what you think of Shore Leave. Did I miss anything obvious? Any trivia? Do you disagree with my take on anything? I love to hear your views, so do hit me up in the comments. Do give me a like if you've enjoyed the episode. A thumbs up would really help me, as would a subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, takes a second, and it would help me so much, and I appreciate it very much. Let's leave things there. I will say to take care, stay safe, travel well, and as always, I am going to invite you to live well and prosper. Bye for now.